the study is underway, you can take buildings and areas out, but you cannot add them. So looking at this entire, area sort of from 155th up to maybe 163rd or so, we drew a much broader boundary with rationale for, why. And there was sort of three, I guess, historical components. That really wasn't taken, seriously. It didn't go anywhere. And, once again, had it moved, the site in question for item 2 would once again have been addressed. So I think the issue of where the city focuses, not just resources, but attention. I think the Community Board 12 and Land Use and Community Board 12 had, over the decade or so that I've been on the board, worked really hard to make intelligent statements when it comes to land use and planning. It's not kind of, off the top. And we worked very closely with our colleagues at the Borough President's Office and City Planning. And so when we issue something as a request and there is no response or it's just rejected outright, that is problematic. And we often have to wonder, is it because we are not the Upper East Side? And that then brings in the whole issue of, race and fairness. But moving from that, I would like to I guess first bring in Tim Anderson from the Borough President's Office to share the office's, perspective on this issue of inclusion and fairness in planning and zoning, and what have been some of the obstacles and what are you looking at? And then I'd like to loop in Sean Rickenbacker to see, based on the work that you're doing with other community boards and based on your background, what are some of the things that we should in fact be, we meaning not just the community board, but the community board and agencies of city government looking at to address these. So Tim?
Hello, yep. So thank you again for including me on this. This is very timely, and this conversation has been going on for quite some time, and it's good to see it pushed up to the forefront. I know that I share with Ryan that I'm relatively new to Gail's team, so it started right during the pandemic, so still getting used to Zoom calls and getting used to meeting everyone. But I can definitely say what I've been able to absorb in the few months that I've been at the offices. Gail has supported 100% affordable housing, up and down Manhattan. So I feel like, affordable housing is just tied into so many other issues that affect these communities. And I feel like, the more that we can fight for and advocate for affordable housing, really all around, will definitely yield some great results. And I know she's also fought a lot for a lot of the small businesses, and I'm thinking primarily of just, the Inwood rezoning that just passed and just her opposition to it. But, she's been a champion in a lot of ways for more diversity, more equity. And I think that, going forward, we're going to continue to be very vocal as in this I know my colleague Natalie is on as well. I don't know if I hit everything, but if she wanted to add anything, if she's available, but if not, then definitely happy to engage more in this discussion to get your feedback and to kind of understand what your concerns are.
Well, we do have Natalie logged in as a panelist, so if Natalie wants to add anything, she can just unmute herself and speak.
Hi, Wayne. It's good to see everybody again. I think that my colleague from our land use division has, kind of summarized. Gail is very big on making sure that whenever these developments or plans or changes come in, that the hyperlocal community is engaged, so that people who are coming in are understanding the impact on the local families and on the character of that local community. And she takes, a very strong stance against things that would alter that. Tim mentioned the Inwood rezoning, which, Wayne wrote the 12-page manifesto that was the reply from this board when I had the honor of serving as a member along with you guys. But more recently, Gail did a firm no on the Lenox Terrace rezoning, which stood to have detrimental effects on the character of Central Harlem, specifically on its demographics.
And just to circle back with something Natalie said, actually both Natalie and Tim, the Inwood rezoning, for example, that 12-page resolution was not a resolution where the Community Board 12 was against it per se. It was a very detailed, very nuanced resolution that addressed each component of the rezoning, some of which we were against, some of which we supported, and some of which we recommended modifications to. We took a lot of time. I think that we went through 18 months of deliberation to get to that point. So that was it's an example of, we try to provide, the agencies that have to review our resolutions with, intelligent comments. And although one of the representatives of the City Council's Land Use Committee said it was, one of the, most impressive, resolutions they've seen on that, it's not clear the extent to which the level of detail and nuance was really followed through, because what was passed, ultimately did not really address many of the issues or the recommendations that were raised. And if it did, it would have really had less of the adverse impact that has been scaring everyone from the very beginning. But with that, let's invite Sean to also comment on this, and also to share with us what are some of the things that he or others in the planning field are doing to address this issue of inclusion and equity in planning and urban development, for that matter.
Yeah, well, thank you, Wayne, and thank you, Community Board 12 and the Land Use Committee for getting us together around this topic. I mean, it's extraordinarily timely and important that I think what we're doing right now, communicating across what is often the silos of the community, agencies, particularly from where I sit, academia and research centers, as well as the citizens who are most affected by our endeavors and our work. So, I mean, from where we sit, and I've been now director at the Bond Center for 2 years, and we proposed in the reestablishing of the center, perhaps what we thought and still believe is a fairly new model, and again, approaching what was not new to us, diversity, inclusion, and as well as empowerment in the development of urban communities and sustaining them. And what we most endeavored to do was to establish really transparent but yet firm relationships with city agencies, community boards, the private sector, industry, and ourselves. And that with that kind of collaboration, that we could truly innovate. And so to Wayne's point, of some of the incredible work that CB12's Land Use Committee, and as well as some of the local community groups who contributed to the research there, that work, and my brief opportunity to review it, was really quite revealing and stunning in its observations and accuracy in terms of what some of the issues were. So what I imagine is that more of that, and perhaps the recognition of the value, which speaks to inclusion of that kind of work, must find its way into the kind of operating mechanisms of the system of DCP and other agencies. And to help do that, I think we are in an age now where, and I think that the members of DCP mentioned this in their introductions, that the ability to reflect and perhaps examine and analyze the effectiveness of these policies. We now have in many cases, 20 years to now look back and evaluate. And perhaps there might be a shortage of the data on how we do that, but it needs to coalesce in a concerted and published effort that we will, with the most transparency available. As we all know, data is often not necessarily the most truthful, or data analysis, truthful execution of recording what has happened over time, but certainly being able to look back and see if we've met those target goals. Some of the information that's included in environmental impact studies, we can now look back and see if there's correlation between those past resolutions and what we will now see ourselves dealing with. And I think now with COVID, as the saying goes, laying bare the inequities across so many factors in our cities, it certainly points back directly to our policies. And so Wayne can tell you, but I'll speak for myself, that the JMAX Bond Center is uniquely focused on doing that. And we're partnering with the likes of JP Morgan, analyzing community data based on zip code and incomes. We're working with our local departments across the college, right? So, you know, I know that there are city planners and design professionals here, and I don't know who's watching online, but I certainly believe that, you know, we are not as effective if we are not talking to the economists, if we are not talking to the community, if we are not talking to the social scientists to help inform us and make a more comprehensive and holistic, or take a more comprehensive and holistic approach to analyzing what it is that we have done collectively to kind of right the ship a bit, or at least, and perhaps in a more radical fashion, rebuild or reconstruct how it is that we will operate to ensure that we do provide diversity and inclusion. And, you know, I mean this in the extent by which city planning has the ability to write policy, but it also means figuring out ways to incentivize the private sector. We all know that they are a huge component and have to be recognized as a partner in this. And so I think, again, that not the trifecta, but the kind of quadruple helix, if you will, of agencies, academia, industry, and citizens, I think that is going to be the way that we're going to find some agreement across all of those that are looking toward us for leadership and direction to improve the current situation. So I'll stop there and hopefully engage in some further conversation with you all.
Thank you, Sean. Actually, I'd like to open this up to the committee members. You know, what questions, what thoughts do you have for any of the panelists, or what reflections do you have on things the Land Use Committee has worked on that addresses, you know, the topic at hand, and what we might do to bring those back to the forefront?
If I might, Wayne, if there's no other hand up, there's an initiative, and by the way, just to turn the knife to the City College people, the symbol of City College looks to the past and looks to the present and looks to the future. So one of the ways we can address what was bad in the past, what needs to be improved, is to do better things for the future. And this is going to sound like a tangent, but it isn't, because I suddenly figured something out. We passed a resolution about 2 years ago or something, having to do with the sunlight that hits the roofs of apartment buildings, because there are acres and acres of apartment buildings in Washington Heights all over the city that are all the same height and don't cast shadows on one another. And these roofs can be used for solar generation of power. And even better, the equipment that does it will get lighter and lighter. And this is all relevant, and you'll see I'm getting somewhere. There are already initiatives that city roofs have to do good things, like be green roofs or generate electricity. Now, green roofs are heavy, but photoelectric stuff photovoltaic stuff does not have to be heavy, and it can be designed light. So these roofs are available for, but they won't be available for all this electric generation unless we prevent shadows from being cast upon them by zoning. And there's been stuff like this around the country, but that isn't my revelation. It suddenly dawned on me, who lives in these apartment buildings that constitute the acres and acres of 6-story buildings and 5-story buildings in Manhattan and the Bronx? It's all minority communities. And that's why it suddenly dawned on me, it all comes together. We can prevent a further wrong, let's put it that way, because we cannot not allow shadows to be cast upon these buildings. And it is now, it only just dawned on me tonight, thanks to you guys, an environmental justice issue. These people may not have their lights on. And see, again, I want to get back to the practicality of it. All these buildings are going to have to improve their roofs according to the new city law, local law, something or another. There are too many numbers to remember. But they will not be able to do green roofs with that kind of construction because they're too heavy. These are buildings, 5, 6-story buildings with bearing walls that probably hold themselves up, and that's about it. However, like I said, photovoltaic stuff does not have to be heavy. So this is all one piece. And of course, this is something our board, and by the way, the person who started this was not me, but another board member named O.C. Kaminer. And anytime I bring this up, I have to give her the credit for initiating this. But I think this is an issue that has to be can be part of this overall thing we're all talking about. Because again, we make things better by making things better in the future and by preventing wrongs in the future. That is my 2 cents. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jim. Vivian, Chris, Steve, Rosie, Omar.
I mean, there's housing types that are not only the 6-story in this neighborhood, and in fact, it seems like everything newer that's been built that's affordable is very tall.
I wonder in terms of the issue of equity and inclusion, because there are tall buildings that are luxury and there are tall buildings that are public housing. But the question is, should we have tall buildings that discriminate against who lives there or in what neighborhoods they're located?
I'm getting there. When Nextdoor came to our neighborhood and I was brought to a first meeting of a couple of us, they wanted to only make the Audubon Park Historic District the older buildings. They thought that we were a neighborhood and only we should be talking to each other. And I remember saying to them, but look at River Terrace. That's us too. And they at first kind of didn't believe it. And, it's odd to have external forces like a business based on conversation in neighborhoods making the decision to some degree based on housing types. It's just there are consequences for people's assumptions about neighborhoods as well.
That is, absolutely true. And it's interesting that basically a neighborhood social networking business would, want to so narrowly define neighborhood. But if you go back to the issue of the boundaries for Audubon Park, the very argument you made regarding River Terrace and River Arts was the argument for their inclusion. If you were looking at the, sort of the political social forces that urbanized Upper Manhattan, and you're looking at the northern expansion of both the number 1 train and of Riverside Drive and the Henry Hudson, that brought waves of development. First the pre-war buildings, and then some of the 1940s buildings. The more current ones would be, River Terrace and River Arts, and that would give us a complete picture, and that would really give us a complete district. And that was, our approach. But that approach, that logic, was not something that city planning, went along with. River Terrace, for example, is so visible from the historic district. It's kind of hard to say that it's visually not part of it.
And the views actually of the historic district from River Terrace are amazing.
Right.
Well, they're stuck, landmarks are certainly stuck on typology, and things have to kind of be the same visually, even if that's not necessarily the only measure.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting point, and I think the Borough President's Office and City Planning might also, chime in on this. The New York City Landmark Preservation Law, takes into account, I think basically architecture, history, and culture. It needn't be that this building was, designed by, Sanford White, with the hand of God on his shoulder. It could be a nondescript building that was the home of someone of note. There are a number of things. And if you're looking at a historic district and you're looking at the city of New York, I mean, that is history and culture. So those are some of the approaches Community Board 12, but Community Board 9 as well has taken in advocating for the history and culture, and in many cases, the architecture as well of our upper Manhattan communities to be, acknowledged and recognized. And, that too is part of this issue of equity and inclusion. And often, folks will think about landmarking as being something that is, not for them, or it's somehow an elite statement. But if you're saying that, the city is recognizing and acknowledging, the value of something, the value of, buildings or history of a neighborhood, that's not being elite at all. That's looking at the people who are there and saying that you matter. And as a tangent, when I began in affordable housing, at this juncture, a quarter of a century ago, we made a trip to Pittsburgh and spoke to folks from the Pittsburgh Redevelopment Authority. And their initial approach was to tear down all of their old buildings and to build, like in the South Bronx on single family, ranch style houses. And then all of a sudden they stopped and said, wait a minute, there's something called historic tax credits. And all of the historic buildings are in our neighborhoods. So they stopped tearing down the urban fabric and started, leveraging preservation as a community development tool. We have an unusually quiet land use committee, but if there are no committee members who have points to add, I would say I see this, and I think the committee sees this as not the flavor of the day conversation, but something that is very real, and something that if we were to take the neighborhood planning and land use study that the community board did with City College and completed in 2007. And we used that as a tool for updating it, more than a decade later, to responding to the, points City Planning made, what priorities have changed? How do we look at things, in 2020 versus how we looked at it at 2007? I think that would be an excellent opportunity for City Planning and the Bond Center and the Borough President's Office of the Planning to work with Community Board 12 to update that vision for land use and planning in Washington Heights, Inwood, because once again, that's something that we spent a couple of years doing, included many community meetings, and it was surprising when EDC first came to us and proposed the Inwood rezoning. They did not know that study existed, even though it had been widely circulated. So that's where I would leave, this particular topic, with an invitation to the panelists to, work with us to update that vision for what are our land use and planning needs now, and as Jim Berlin so perfectly said, and looking forward.
Yeah, Wayne, if I may, you have our full support at the Bond Center, and I think your leadership and the leadership of the members of the Land Use Committee has been extraordinary. And I just want to advocate for what I would describe as a necessity, is a kind of radical rethinking. Because what has gotten us here has, I think we would all agree, has certainly fallen short. And when we speak of equity and inclusion, I also want to speak to a segment of the industry that often goes overlooked in favor of the direct impact on citizens and communities. But it's those organizations that are intent on helping to provide and even develop affordable housing, who also struggle with the likes of the federal AMI and how that's calculated. And I know that Congresswoman Yvette Clarke is working with, looking to rewrite the rules of affordable housing, and in particular AMI. But I think that there is an acknowledgement that needs to take place that, as Vivian mentioned, there are these typologies coupled with policy that has handcuffed the imagination and the public imagination, as well as the public agency imagination of how we provide solutions, whether that be through physical form or financial incentives or partnerships with federal opportunities for funding. And so we have a long way to go, but I think it's these kinds of conversations where we need to get right down to the brass tacks of what does systemic change look like for us in this kind of profession. I have to say, I no longer believe in incremental. It's been very slow. We've watched the degradation of communities happen while we inch along. And so I would really welcome both the Manhattan Borough President's Office, DCP, CB12, as well as others, to continue this conversation. I'm available. I know my colleagues are interested, some very invested and thoughtful and skillful people. And I think if we can collaborate along the lines of what Jim mentions about these futures that we're talking about and provide opportunity for all, I think we can make some progress. So again, I'm going to support Wayne and calling for us all to continue this conversation, particularly around the issues of land use for CB12.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you. I would now like to shift to the next topic of discussion. And for this, Ebenezer, if you could upgrade Peter Green, is it, to be a panelist so that he can walk us through. This is as I mentioned, this is the discussion of proposed development at 857 Riverside Drive, which is like literally just a long block away from, where Vivian and I live. And, this is an area where, in this entire area west of Broadway is R8, whereas the areas east of Broadway are R7-2. And so as all my, land use committee members know, there's a difference in, the maximum FAR that is permissible under R7-2 versus, R8. And when we had a planning fellow through the auspices of Scott Stringer's office, and we undertook a soft site analysis, it was pointed out that, because that R8 zoning allows you to have an FAR of, I think, 6.02, unless you're doing quality housing, in which case you're up to 7 or 7.02. That can lead to, if you did a new development, a very different building type, building form, urban form, than the typical 5 or 6 story buildings that probably cover more lot area than is currently permitted under zoning. But we have a very urban environment that has a distinct character based upon the age of when the buildings went up. We have some larger buildings than that. So if we have to be honest, my building, Vivian's building, 611, all kind of, within, spitting distance of each other, are much taller than that 6-story context. So they've also been around for more than a century. But, we looked at the potential for something like what is happening now to happen, where if a lot were purchased, if air rights were purchased, if a building were, you know, vacated or otherwise damaged and was demolished, the new building, following zoning, not doing anything devious and nefarious, following what is, you know, encouraged by zoning, would produce something that's very different than the current urban fabric. Also, what we call the upper and lower drive were areas that we recommended be either included in the Audubon Park Historic District, because if you look at the development of the area, I mean, this whole area was an area of, you know, sort of a rural suburban area of single-family homes and mansions that over time urbanized. And, you know, some of the buildings along the upper and lower drive are as interesting, as noteworthy as the buildings that were included. And the particular building at 857 is one of the few remnants of that pre-urbanization era. So there were a lot of arguments for why, you know, not specifically just this building, but the whole streetscape was something that should be included. As I said, that didn't happen, which leads us to a potential development that would involve, as I understand, demolishing that building, which is, you know, a two-story, whatever, wood frame, single-family home, probably dating back to the time of the Audubons, and, you know, building a 13-story structure on a somewhat narrow lot. And there were some early conversations in August and a fair amount of community you know, dialogue over the last several weeks. And, you know, Vivian Ducat and I have been sharing emails on that, as well as Steve. And more recently, I was put in touch with Peter Green, who is going to walk us through some more detail.
Wayne, if I could just interject something, because I'm looking at an aerial view of this area.
Okay.
Just to the north of this site are several buildings filled with photocells on their roof, photovoltaics on their roof. So if this building is built, of course, the zoning we're asking that should have been in place 2 years ago already. Of course, magic doesn't occur anymore. But had this protective zoning been in place, these solar cells, these photovoltaic installations would not be in jeopardy, and now they are. This building will, in fact, block sun from
beyond,
and they will generate significantly less electricity.
right, I think, but
So here we are.
beyond the issue of solar, you know, we're looking at a broader issue of, you know, a distinct impact on community character.
Oh, I agree with you there too, but it
So
also.
I would like to let, you know, Peter share with us his, or the group's conversation, comments and conversation. And so, Peter, you have the screen. Unmute yourself.
Okay. Good evening. Thank you very much for having us here, Wayne. My name's Peter Green, and I'm the so one of the co-founders of what we're calling the Upper Riverside Residents Association, which we actually intend to be much more than stopping the tower at 857. We're have been working on some of the issues with the park that's there in between the upper and lower drives. I want to talk about this, but first I just want to say that the conversation this evening, and I'm not just trying to tell you what a great guy you are, Wayne, but it's really absolutely related. What you're saying is absolutely related to what we're concerned about, which is something completely out of scale for the neighborhood, which is both an issue of this R8 versus other designations, but it's also an issue of equity to people in the community. You know, why is it that the one or two spots that have the ability to engineer something with, you know, vaulted floors and shoot you up above everybody else to get $1 million views of the river should be the one or two places that get any investment and ruin it for everyone else? And I think that's something that really needs to be considered, and we can get to this at a later time, but I think, you know, actually rezoning this area may be just as important as anything else to preserve the character and preserve the ability of people who live here to feel that they live in a neighborhood that and in a city that respects them as much as people on, say, Fifth Avenue are respected by the zoning laws that apply there, that nobody can steal their view of Central Park, for instance. So look, my name's Peter Green. We've come here to express our neighborhood's concern with the proposed demolition of what's sometimes known as the historic Audubon Guest House and the erection of a 13-story tower of micro condominiums that would average about 600 square feet on the site at 857 Riverside. The developer, whose name is Sigmund Freund, and his partners had signed options to buy the house as far back as 2018. Last year, they concluded a contract of sale for about $975,000, which seems absurdly low for what they're claiming is 31,000 buildable square feet, at least half of it with stunning views west over the Hudson. That itself already raises questions. When we learned of the planned development earlier this month, as neighbors, we were appalled. And those of us who knew the house's history had hoped it might at some point be restored to its former glory. It was in about 2000 that the current owners knocked off the front veranda and the cupola that had really distinguished the house and plastered it with some kind of fake asbestos stone or fiberglass fake stone facade. And we were really, all of us were very dismayed that what is really a diverse, affordable, and eminently livable and workable, walkable neighborhood will be irrevocably damaged by this 13-story pile of dreck. I have looked at some of the other buildings that this fellow has built, and I don't know how an registered architect actually managed to graduate from architecture school and create that. But really, the literal and figurative shadow that this 135-story tower would cast on our neighborhood would really be a 135-foot high middle finger to us and our community. So I'm going to lay out a number of our concerns just in outline right here, and then feel free to ask me in detail about any of them. We're deeply concerned about the size and bulk, and whether in fact something of that size can be built. Even the numbers in the pre-application don't add up. The demolition permit has, just to my amateur eye, about 15 errors in it, including the owner of the plot. The enormous number of environmental and structural concerns, in part because it's built along a 1800s retaining wall that runs the length of Upper Riverside Drive, at the far end of which is at Castle Village, and you all probably know about how that collapsed about a date ago. The developer has a very poor history of either doing right by his neighbors or doing right by the Department of Buildings or by HPD. He's got stacks of violations, stop work orders, even a ripping down a stop work order and going back to work on his site. This would really be the destruction of an irreplaceable landmark. I'll try to put the picture of the thing on my screen. The original is quite a lovely house. It wouldn't take an enormous amount of work to restore it to that site that, you know, could become a great asset for our community, some sort of a museum or cultural institution that could, you know, ideally unite people across this section, not just, you know, west of Fort Washington, but really, you know, all the way over to Edgecombe or Amsterdam or St. Nicholas, and bring people together. Already people from those areas pass right in front of this on their way down to the parks every evening for barbecues and weekend family picnics. You just have to stand out there, and it's kind of an amazing cross-section of Washington Heights that you can see and talk with. They failed, which will tick you people off, they failed to present this project to the community board or let anyone know they were working on this. They had signed a promise to buy, a purchase promise back in 2018 with the owners. We're also very concerned that given the current economic climate and the way that many New York developers work, that the lot could simply be bulldozed and left vacant. The demolition permit doesn't even provide for how they plan to remove the debris. And there's also the effects on the tax base in the area. I mean, it would certainly improve the tax base for that one lot, but probably significantly reduce the value of many of the apartments and co-op apartments around it, which would lower people's home values and lower the tax base again for the neighborhood. And then finally, you know, we really need, it's going back to Wayne's point in the whole discussion, what I said at the beginning, we want to make it really clear Washington Heights is not for sale. No really deeply rooted neighborhood like this should be available for somebody from out of borough with no connection to the area to whip in and put up, you know, a space grabber like this that would really, you know, disrespect the whole neighborhood. So I think there are a lot of reasons why we're upset. I'm hoping that, you know, I'd actually been put in touch with Ryan. I have to respond to an email to him in the next day or so from a colleague of his at City Planning. But I'm hoping that you three from City Planning can help us figure out, you know, a more systemic solution to this. There is a whole row of townhouses north of it that we'd hate to see fall and become just a wall of cheap luxury condos. So that's my opening statement. We've got quite a number of people in the community involved in this. We're raising money to do, you know, what would need to be done to try to keep whatever is built there, if we can't save the house, whatever is built there, to a reasonable bulk. And I'm hoping everyone else here can help us with this. And then just let me shout out to who is on the call as well, Maria Luna, and I think Bruce Robertson was, who are both part of what we're working on. And I know Tim Anderson attended our last Zoom meeting and listened to a lot of our concerns and has been working with us, as has, yeah, Natalie's there too, Natalie Espino, both from Gail Brewer's office, and Al Taylor, our assemblyman, our state senator, Robert Jackson, and our council member, Mark Levine. All three personally attended our meetings and are doing what they can to help us keep this monster under control. So that's my end of my statement.
Thank you, Peter. Natalie, Tim, anything that you want to add from the borough president's office perspective?
Sure. I can say that I have definitely let Gail know about this building, and you know, she is concerned about overdevelopment. And you know, I'm helping Peter look into this issue a bit. I have a few questions that I still need to ask about this development just in general, and have some questions for DOB, which I do plan on reaching out to them this week to see if I can get an answer. But you know, Gail's concerned, and I'm keeping her in the loop about this. So I don't know if Natalie wanted to add anything else.
Yeah, no, I just want to add, I mean, all of you know that Gail is always in the community, and several of you who live in the neighborhood, some of you on this call now, have approached her about it. So she knows that there is, this is an issue that is important to a lot of people. It's concerning a lot of people, that we need to gather as much information as we can. And I just, again, want to my appreciation, my respect to the group of neighbors, you know, Peter, Vivian, Leslie, many others who've done the deep dive into looking into this and keep updating us on new facts, new data points of things that look, you know, additional concerns about proper notification. So every one of those gets run up the chain in my office when you guys communicate, and we try to follow up and clarify that.
Thanks, Natalie. And Peter, I think I've shared this with you, but you know, just for everyone's, you know, edification, this project, you know, first came to my attention literally about a month ago, and you know, looking at it from the land use planning perspective, you know, sort of from the analytical side of the head, you know, the question was, you know, how are you achieving the square footage? You know, what's the applicable, you know, FAR? On the creative side of it, it's the architect of record, you know, is an engineer. Nothing against engineers, but you know, what is the design sensibility that that engineer is bringing, you know, to the table? But so as we looked at it, you know, it was not clear to me how the FAR is being achieved. City Planning, you know, pointed out that if they opted for quality housing, it allows for a higher FAR, which, you know, we in land use are all, you know, familiar with. And, you know, with quality housing, there are certain design considerations that you have to include. So, those questions have been like top of mind for the better part of a month. We also know just by looking at the analytical side of it that a site that's less than 10,000 square feet, even if the zoning calculation says you have to have parking, that parking requirement can be waived. The point that Peter brought to my attention only a day or so ago was, does the sliver law, come into play? And if it does, doesn't that limit, the height notwithstanding what's permissible under, the R8 quality housing zoning? The issue of the soil, site condition, geotechnical, foundation wall are all, one. And as we've shared, and, Steve and I have shared emails that, those points need to be brought to the agency having jurisdiction, which is, the building department. And I understand the borough president may in fact be doing that. But, beyond liking or disliking the project, there are a lot of, technical questions that need to be answered.
Wayne, could I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Um,
And
Excuse me?
who's speaking?
Steve Simon.
Okay, you did not introduce yourself at the beginning of the meeting, so for the record, we just wanted to let everyone know Steve is also a member of the Land Use Committee
And a neighbor.
and a neighbor.
I live further down on Riverside Drive at 155th Street. Peter, I had received an email from Leslie Doyle a few days ago, in which I believe she says that you had consulted with zoning professionals who pointed out to you that there were errors made in the calculations as to how tall this building could be. I wonder if you could expand upon that and tell us what are these errors that were made, because I would certainly like to be able to advocate for a lower building if we can make that argument.
Yeah, I'm not enough of an expert yet, and the zoning advocate who we are talking to, we've got to raise a little money to be able to pay him first to get a real opinion out of him. But he did say that if you do what Wayne and I did, which is take the numbers in the pre-application and add them together, we are correct that they don't add up properly. But that there's a big problem in the way this is done in New York City, he says, and it seems to be borne out by my experience, which is that until the Department of Buildings issues a zoning diagram for a project, you can't really know what they're claiming they can get for the space. And so you can't contest it until they've issued it, and then you only have 45 days to fight back, which is really kind of silly. And the Zola and other tools that are supposed to help people figure out what they can build don't actually give you these numbers in any very clear way. There are a lot of there's a lot of wiggle room.
Yeah, but let me just.
You'd really have to see what portion of the lot they actually intend to build on, because that would dictate, I believe, how tall the building could actually go.
Yeah. So let me just make a more basic point. And we do know the lot, but I don't think it has to be incumbent upon, community residents to raise money to pay a zoning, expert or, a professional. I mean, please feel free to do so. But as I mentioned, this came to my attention, a month ago, and I immediately looped in our, city planning and borough president, planning and urban design reps, to have them take a look at it. And the reason why I asked you, Peter, and Leslie to send me, whatever documentation is available with respect to the errors in the zoning calculation is so that once again, the community board, land use committee could forward that information to city planning and to the borough president's office to have them run their own analysis to see what makes sense. And I think the point that was raised in the email that you sent on, given the width of the site, doesn't the sliver law kick in? And if the sliver law kicks in, doesn't the width of the street govern the height? So, I mean, a number of these things are, in my mind, have been put, not in my mind, following my email committee, has been put in the laps of, our, planning professionals to get back to us with, further detail and analysis, and the extent to which there's more information, such as the applicability of other laws, such as sliver, that may be pertinent to this site. I urge you to get them to us as soon as possible.
I did. That was it. Was all in the letter, and Tim has it as well. And I'm very happy to send it to Ryan or Annie or Lara, whoever.
I've already sent
the
it
right
to them.
person.
When you sent it to me, I forwarded it to them. They
Okay.
have it, and I asked them to take a look at it.
Great. I think this. Maria, I think wants to say something.
Well, I'm concerned about also if there have to be an environmental study done also before, any demolition or anything like that takes place. I mean, I just not familiar with that type of investigation before whoever is planning this monstrosity, because if you compare to the heights of the buildings adjacent to that, which is like, I live on like next door, 839, which is only a 6-story, building, and it has the basements, for the laundry. How is that going to take? I mean, 13 story is a huge difference in what we have right now. So
As
it
tall
may,
as the Riviera, yes.
Wayne, and
And I'm on the 13th story.
Yeah.
13.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I would say that, once again, those questions, Maria, are, I think, perfect questions for city planning and the Borough President's Office to include, in their analysis. To my knowledge, any demolition you would have to do prior to that, a study to see if there are hazardous materials, asbestos or lead. And as part of the demolition, you would have to have a plan for dealing with those environmental issues. I don't know if, an as-of-right building of this size triggers the need for, an EIS. But I would say that the issue that was raised early on relative to the soil conditions, and I don't know how it is documented, and there's so many things that are talked about in the community, but we don't know how it's documented. But my understanding is either River Terrace or River Arts has, sunk a bit over the years based on the soil conditions. And do those same soil conditions impact this site? And
Also, I'd like to say that the buildings along here, 839, 835, 839, 845, 853, which is like next to that particular site, they were built like shelter from, during the Second World War. And there is being a problem if you take a look at some of the buildings, there are cracks between walls. And that is an effect of the foundation not being too secure. All of a sudden, sometimes if you live here, the traffic that goes up, the buildings move. I mean, if you can see the light fixtures, they move when we have like heavy traffic around here. So I just don't know how come someone comes up with an idea of building, this high, I mean, it's just scary for some of us that live around here.
so, Natalie, Tim, isn't the Borough President's Office working with the current or former borough engineer to look at many of these issues? Just lost that.
Sorry. Sorry. Yeah, I, being very relatively new, came across the borough engineer. I don't think we've reached out just yet to him, but definitely will do that very, very soon.
But I mean, more broadly, what is the borough president's approach to investigating the, the concerns that have been raised and, as I said, the very real technical questions that need to be addressed?
Right now, I think a lot of my questions, just based off of the information that was pulled by you, Vivian, Peter, definitely are going to come from DOB with the application filings, and just a couple of questions that I have in regards to the sliver law. I'm not sure what Gail has planned, but I do know that she is going to be working on this as well. But I do hope to have a few more answers for you, hopefully very soon.
So, can we or should we be expecting the borough president's office to be coordinating very closely with DOB on those issues?
Yeah, yes, I'm gonna look into it, and I'm gonna hope to get something back to you very soon.
Right. Natalie, you had unmuted yourself for a second, then you muted yourself again. Did you want to chime in?
That is actually a cheeky cat who keeps walking on my because she wants me to go open her birthday present. And there it is for all of Facebook Live to hear.
Anything further? Well, let me, Vivian, go ahead, please.
Two things. One, what hasn't been said is that there's a 2-story drop on the back of the building that you can see if you stand on whatever it's called, the veranda, whatever sticks out of the back of River Arts. There are 2 more stories in the back, which would also make it a more difficult site. But secondly, there's a 2-way street in front of where the construction would be that also has a bus lane on it. So to some degree, it's a transportation nightmare to consider how they would
Where's
reach.
the bus lane?
The bus lane goes right in front of that building. It comes, the BX6
Oh, when it's coming
comes
up the hill.
around from River
Yes.
Terrace and comes down there. So you've got a bus, you have cars in both directions. How are they even going to maneuver that site? I know it's their problem, but it could.
Well, that raises, and Bruce Robertson, hopefully you are listening and yourself, because Bruce is on the Traffic and Transportation Committee. And the question I had is, DOT, to my knowledge, was proposing, and Maria, you may remember this as well, to make that 2-way street one way because it was too narrow for 2-way traffic and the parking. But for zoning purposes, it's considered a wide street, which allows them to do the higher FAR. To me, that's inconsistent that for the purposes of vehicular traffic, it's a narrow street, but for the purposes of zoning, it's a wide street.
It's just that because I had to say, it's because there is a curve. If you see what we call the embankment, which is like the upper drive that goes to the building, A78, it's the way the area is constructed for the traffic to flow, regularly for the BX6 bus. And also you have to remember that DOT is working on Riverside Drive West, and they're not going to be completing that until like 2022. If they don't extend it to probably 2023, we have major problems here.
Right, but my point, and I would say once again, this is something we would like, we'd like city planning to look at it because it's a city planning issue, but we'd like the borough president's office to look at it. The physical street, what we call the lower drive, which is where Vivian says the BX6 when it's coming back up the hill, is, it's a fairly narrow street. And
It's narrow.
DOT, one agency of city government, is saying it's too narrow. It can't be 2-way. We have to make it 1-way. But for the zoning analysis, it's saying that, well, no, this is a wide street. If this were a narrow street, there would be a lesser maximum building height that would be permissible. So we need to square this circle. It doesn't make sense to me that for one city agency it's wide and for another city agency it's narrow.
Well, now it's narrow, because the buses that are being used
Yeah, no,
are
please,
wider.
Maria, it's narrow because it is a narrow street. There isn't enough room to have parking on both sides.
That's
There's
the
only one lane. There's only one lane in each direction. How can
Yeah, but-
anybody consider this to be a wide street? That's ridiculous.
Well, we've been saying that for, yeah.
That is,
We've
Stephen,
been saying
Maria,
that for a long time.
but that is the point. That is the analysis. That is the question that we want answered. The physical dimension of the street hasn't changed in, a century.
Yeah.
If the street is physically, if you measure, if it is too narrow to be considered for traffic purposes, a wide street, how can it be considered a wide street for zoning purposes? So we need that question looked at seriously.
Yeah.
And
Yes, definitely.
I mean,
Absolutely.
Broadway is a wide street.
Yes.
157, actually 157 used to be two-way, and
Listen.
late Denny Farrell was part of the group that advocated for it to be one-way because it was too narrow. It has the same VX6 bus, and even one-way, if you double park a Volkswagen Beetle, the bus cannot get by. And that Riverside Drive is no wider than 157th Street, but it's also not a straight street.
Right.
So I really, it's really important for, our planning reps to look at that because, paper analysis may not make sense with a real life analysis.
Also, another concern that I have is that are we sure that they have not purchased the air right?
You just muted yourself, Maria.
If they purchased the air right of the building, the 6-story building and the little brownstones that are on the other side. That is
Well,
only like 3 stories.
If they purchase the air
That could be a
rights,
complication also.
if they purchase the air rights, that would be recorded with the Department of Finance, and we'd be able to search it with Acris. But based on the analysis that has been provided, they do not need air rights to build what they are building if the analysis is correct. And that's the point we're trying to get to, is if the analysis is correct. So I guess the question is, given where we are, and I'd like to get some feedback from both the Borough President's Office and from City Planning, timing for getting back to us with answers to some of these, technical questions.
Could I just say that Peter was dropped from the call? Is there any way to rejoin him?
Was he dropped from the call or
He
did
dropped from the discussion. He just texted me.
Well, he needs to reconnect. I don't see him as being logged in anymore.
Oh.
He needs to log in again.
Wayne, he reconnected, but he needs to be promoted again.
Okay, so Ebenezer needs to do that. Ebenezer, if you can make Peter a panelist again?
I just promote him.
Okay. So, but getting back to the question to the Borough President's Office and to City Planning.
So, we can reach out to the appropriate people in our agency. So I know that the sliver law is something that's outstanding. That's actually an interesting question because it is a irregular lot. So there's some questions about how you define what a sliver lot is and how that applies. So we'll certainly look into that. And then the other one being the definition of the wide street. Apologies if I'm missing anything on the straightforward technical questions. I do believe that we've kind of gone as far as we can with the information we have regarding just general height and FAR. As we've said, it looks like based on the information we have, they are within the regulations of the existing R8 zoning using quality housing regs. But if there's any additional questions on that, please let me know. But I think that's those are two kind of quick questions that we can talk to our zoning division experts about and get back with you shortly.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I thank you and the Borough President's Office for getting back to me with my endless inquiries about, does this calculation make sense? Does that calculation make sense? So what we're saying is that's a good starting point. And now, there are some additional levels of detail. The sliver law, actually, I think it's a quite interesting question. I was and remain perplexed on the depth of that street being defined as a, a wide street. And, as I said, the soil site foundation wall issues that I raised as a concern a month ago, I think those would be the three follow-ups, because if the analysis that was done, given a site of 4,300 square feet in R8A using quality housing, gives you a maxed out envelope of X, the question is, how does that envelope get whittled down based upon these other considerations?
Yeah,
And
I
then
just
definitely-
like to say there's also a couple of, so there's also a couple of odd contradictions from what I have been told by city planning code. It's and by our zoning analyst about apartments to a neighborhood. Why is it exempt from parking?
I think it's the width, it's the
It doesn't make any sense. It seems inconsistent with the rest of the planning code.
No, but
Sure,
if you
but
if you look at the zoning handbook, which is easier to read than the zoning resolution, if the site is less than 10,000 square feet, the parking requirement is waived. And this site is like 4,300 square feet. So it may be crazy, but that's the way the zoning is written.
I guess my big question would be, I want to thank them and hope that we can get some answers to a lot of these questions.
Right, and I think.
I guess my audio is not working.
Well, no, we can hear you, but it's kind of a bad connection, but you got dropped off. I asked the borough president's office and city planning about the time frame for getting back to the community board with answers to some of the questions that were raised relative to the applicability. What is the impact of the sliver law? How is it that the street is both wide and narrow at the same time, and what's the—
Wayne, if I could interject on that, because I actually have the zoning handbook in front of me.
Yeah.
And it says a wide street is a street that is 75 feet or more. So that's the zoning definition of a wide street. Now, no doubt DOT's definition is different, which may be the point you're making, but now we, as far as zoning is, if that street presumably is 75 feet or more, and therefore it's a wide street by zoning's definition.
Right, and as I said, someone would need to measure the street to see if it—
Maria, go out there and measure it. You got a
Now.
tape measure?
I'm running. I'll be back. I'll be back.
Come on, you must have a tape measure.
Oh, you just need foot-long feet, Steve, probably like yours.
No, I know, I'm not a
I
foot.
actually did that. I did measure it. It's a
See that?
50-foot street. Then there's a park. Then there's a 48-foot street on the upper drive.
48.
Well,
No.
just-
What is it?
just
The
the
lower drive is 50 feet?
spaces.
Yeah.
Wow, how can anybody say this is a wide street?
Okay, so we're talking in circles. That's the question that we want.
It's all whether that you try to cheat and count.
Wouldn't the definition in the zoning resolution be the one that governs this? Doesn't matter what DOT says, it's this definition.
Steve, but that's the question.
Maybe they're including the embankment as part of the street by some crazy logic. Remember, this is zoning. It's like,
Yeah, but once again, we're speculating too much.
Exactly.
That's why a specific question was asked. I want
I'll get my tape measure and I'll get that before midnight.
Right, I want city planning, the borough president's office, the folks who are paid to look at these zoning and planning issues, and that's an old version of the handbook, by the way, to come back to us, because I
don't think the number changed.
Unless they're doing that sleight of hand and saying they're taking the upper drive, the lower drive, and the park in between, and saying all of that is the street. If that's what they're doing, but given the topography, if you're on the upper drive, your car would fall quite a bit to get to the lower drive. You'd have to think of them as being two separate streets divided by rather challenging topography. But that's an interesting question for our folks in planning. is the applicant saying, or is zoning saying, that they're taking from basically one side of Riverside Drive to the other side and treating that as a single street, notwithstanding the dramatic change in topography? So, I mean, there are a number of, you know, sort of technical issues that, you know, we really need you to get back to us on. And if what we just discussed isn't all that being done, there again, it really challenges logic. It's not, you know, a little difference, you know, it's, if you know the area, there's a tremendous difference in elevation between the upper and lower drives.
Right.
And
And I'll just quickly say, like, obviously we are continuing to gather information and we're going to bring it to our zoning division, as we already have to a point, but just as you get more information, please share that with us and we'll do our best to look into it. So Peter, please, you know, feel free to send me, if you have my email, please feel free to send me information. It's something, yeah, again, our zoning division is now aware of and we've been communicating about, and we'll certainly continue to do so because we do understand it's an interesting, this lot specifically is, you know, is an interesting size in an interesting place. Riverside Drives is an interesting street. There's a lot of things that are very technical, and so we'll try to dive right into that and hopefully get you some real concrete, better answers.
And how do you keep Sigmund Freud, or whatever his name is, Freund, from ripping it down meanwhile?
Well, in the interim, it is an application that has been filed, so they have not been issued permits. So until that happens, I mean, as soon as the permits are issued, I mean, it could be a business day or however long they decide before they begin to begin demolition. But until the permits are actually issued, it's really, I guess, in a way, it's hard to say when their next step would be.
Which is why
Natalie and Tim, do you have any ability to lean on the buildings department and explain that this is a demolition for a project that, you know, isn't clear that it can be built and that therefore they need to hold off and sit down with the community board, for instance, and others and explain what they're going to do before they put a bulldozer or a sledgehammer in there?
Yeah, I'm definitely ready to, and I definitely will reach out to DOB to list my concerns about this. And yeah, I know Gail is, as I mentioned earlier, she's doing some work there too. And I'll definitely follow up with her tomorrow to see what progress she's made. But I'm definitely reaching out to DOB to see.
So what's your timetable just for sending a letter on letterhead or by email on letterhead to DOB and asking them to just be sure to pause this permit, you know, talk to us before they issue it?
Oh, I'm ready to shoot them an email tomorrow and
Excellent.
let them know what my concerns are.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Good help.
And do you know if Gail is speaking to the commissioner directly?
I'm not sure yet. She's been hard to get a hold of lately, but I'll definitely reach out to her again tomorrow to see if she's made any headway.
Well, I saw her yesterday afternoon and I reminded her that we're going to be on top of this issue, you know, very forcefully. And she agrees that she's looking forward as much information from her staff as she can get. I mean, you know, she's really, I'm sure she will be on our side.
And I'll bring it up in traffic and transportation on Thursday. We have our committee meeting.
Thank you. I'm open to all suggestions about what we can do to make sure that whatever happens there doesn't have a negative impact on our community. So please let me know, and I'm happy to supply whatever I can through Wayne and directly to anybody who needs it directly. But we're, you know, we want to make sure that whatever happens there is good for the community. So,
yeah,
you know, let me know.
Right.
Well, you know, being a neighbor of just seeing a wooden house on that site, I recall years ago when the people who purchased that they just sold the property, cut down a fantastic, beautiful in good shape tree, people in our community, I mean, went totally crazy. We really cry because it's really, if you take a look at the diamond houses and saying we don't have that type of a structure no more. Not that we need another museum probably because we already have one on Broadway, but I think that there's something like this that could be preserved. But of course, if for housing, we need housing, but this type of housing, I don't think would be beneficial for us in this area. As far as traffic is concerned, about the education children, you know, we don't have that many schools for family that will moving, and I don't think that type of apartments, are geared for families. They are very small. They, I don't think they have a 3-bedroom apartment there that will accommodate someone that has, children and things like that. We need to maintain our community, to preserve our community as it is a residential, area, and we know most of each other. And when we have issues, we come together and we fight for everything that we need to fight. And I think that this is, something like this would be really not beneficial to the community. But that's my personal, concern.
Wayne, I just want to point out, can you hear me?
Yes.
I just want to point out that if this is, maybe this is for Peter's benefit, if this is an as-of-right project, it's not going to be easy to get the property owner to come before the community board. There's no compelling reason or requirement that he comes and make a presentation to the community board if it's as of right. So it would be, if he chose to do so, it would be because we somehow convince him that it's in his interest.
Yes, typically, projects that come before the community board, and I will say there have been a couple of projects that are as of right that were presented to the community board because the people involved wanted to do so. For example, the new School of Nursing that was done, that didn't have to come before us, but it was presented to us. There are a couple of residential developments going back a few years that, are as of right, but the property owner developers involved just wanted to give us a heads up. When there is a discretionary action, if there is a ULURP or Board of Standards and Appeals, or if it were landmarked, the new development or renovation would have to go through landmarks, and landmarks would have to go through us. So there are a number of any discretionary action would require it to come before the, the community board, or in some cases, if they're going for 421A, tax benefits, that has come before our Housing and Human Services Committee. If it's truly as of right, the whole purpose of as of right is to have, a development that just, as long as it complies with zoning and the building code, it moves forward. We've raised a number of questions about the zoning, and we've raised a number of issues which may not impact the building code per se, but it impacts issues over which the building department has jurisdiction and would need to look at. So, I look forward to city planning and to the Borough President's office getting back to us with, responses to the questions raised. Peter, you, Leslie, others, any additional information that needs the review and analysis of, city planning and the planners of the Borough President's office, please feel free to send them, my way. And, thank you for sharing with us this evening your concerns.
Can I make one further suggestion?
Sure.
The community board itself could also write a letter to the buildings department and raise some of these questions and request some answers. I mean, we could support what the Borough President's office is doing, but also, and at the same time indicate that these are questions that that are also of concern to people who live in the community. So I would like to see the community board also send a letter.
Would the community board need to do that, or couldn't the district manager or chair just send a letter? Because we're asking questions.
Yes. This doesn't. You're right. This does. I'm not suggesting that this requires a resolution or that it go before the entire board. I think this is something that the chair and/or the district manager could do.
Tomorrow.
Because all we're doing is asking questions. All we're doing is asking for information. All we're doing is making sure that the buildings department pays attention to certain points that are in the application. So I would like to see the community board itself take an affirmative action and send a letter.
Is there a, Tim, Natalie, is there a letter or, some talking points that the Borough President's Office has already reduced to writing that we could, sort of echo and support in our letter to the borough, to the building department?
We're definitely working on it. I think a lot of the feedback that I've gotten in this meeting will definitely direct any letter that comes from our office. As I understand, Councilmember Levine's office is also working on a letter, so I'm definitely working with Natalie to collaborate with them to see what language is in that letter and see if it's something additional that we could sign on to. I'm sorry.
No, your sound had faded out for a second.
Sorry, yeah, my mic's been very odd, but definitely, gathering information at this meeting and getting everyone's concerns together, because your concerns are our concerns, and they'll definitely be put into the email that I'm writing tomorrow to the Department of Buildings, and I'll definitely relay a lot of these concerns to Gail and see if we can get something on letterhead sent somewhere.
If you could copy me on that, we could use that as a basis for the district manager or the chair of the board following up, saying that the community board supports that and adding additional points.
Okay, sounds good.
Anything else?
I have a question for Sean. Are we going to lose Sean?
I'm still here.
All right, but well, I'm not sure what's next on the agenda, but
The next on the agenda is all business, new business, and adjourned. So do you have a question for Sean?
yeah. Sean, earlier you said that Congresswoman Yvette Clarke is working on some way to change the AMI formula. Is she? Do you know? Is there a piece of legislation to that respect?
What I can do, I don't know the current status. I can't speak to it. But what I can do is send you the latest information, or also email to Wayne the latest information I have on her efforts.
Yeah, could you do that? Because that's if what she's talking about is redoing the formula so it only applies to the city and takes out the metropolitan area, I think that's something that that this committee or the community board itself would also like to support.
Yeah, no, it's certainly an intelligent piece of legislation, so I'll certainly look to share that with you.
And we outlined in the Inwood rezoning reso, but also in a reso done years ago on reforming 421A and another one. I mean, there's a very simple approach for taking, the HUD AMI formula and making it work for any community board. It's just that, HPD doesn't follow that very simple approach. So if there's nothing further on this, I want to thank, Peter and everyone else who's been involved. Do continue to keep, me in the loop. You don't have to go through, Vivian or anyone. You just include me with everyone else so that I know what's going on. With that, is there any item of old business from the committee?
Thank you very much, gentlemen and ladies.
Any new business?
Dave Tom has some new business.
And what is that new business?
Something to do with the Hearst House up in Inwood.
Are you providing it, or is he speaking? What?
He's on the, he posted a question and answer. I assume he's on the line.
Well, Ebenezer, can you promote Dave Tom so he can speak? Do you see him there?
Yes, I just promoted
Okay.
him. Dave,
He's there. He just needs to unmute.
Oh, there we go. Hello.
Hi.
Can you hear me now? Can you
Yeah.
hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. This is just a quick update, but I suspect it might be coming up on some of the committees in the fall in the future. We learned over the summer, first of all, my name is Dave Tom. I live in Inwood on 217th Street. I was involved with the Historic District last year, and before that, the Slow Zone and some other initiatives in the area. We learned that the Seventh-day Adventists, who have owned the former Academy of the Sacred Heart of Mary School and the Hearst House Mansion on 215th Street, have now moved Northeast Academy to a new location and have leased the school building to Amber Charter School for 35 years with an extension to 49 years. However, they did not lease the Hearst House. They've retained control of the Hearst House corner, and we don't have any update on that. But it's interesting that there's now a split between the property where the school will continue and the abandoned mansion. Now it will be under different control, which we'll see if something comes up in the future.
So
But I just want to
which
update with
property-
regard to the school.
Which property is the school going to be in?
It's all one lot. It's 532 West 215th, but there's a 1915 mansion at the corner, which is the abandoned Hearst House.
Right.
And then there is the 5-story former Catholic school building that runs along 215th Street. That's had about 200 or so 9 through 12 high school students over the last 40 years. And in the fall of 2021, it will be home to 923 K through 8 students.
Right, right. We actually, years ago, passed a resolution authorizing or requesting that the board chair and district manager reach out to the owners of the Hearst House, basically the Seventh-day Adventists, to engage them in a conversation on what's happening with the building, and what's their interest in having something productive done with it. And sadly, the church was not really responsive. At the time, I was working with a woman who was a member of the congregation. I believe it was a Brooklyn congregation of the Seventh-day that actually owned that property. And you would expect a church to be a little more interested in the community, but I don't think they ever responded.
Yeah, and in Brooklyn properties, they've been doing some pretty aggressive redevelopment. So the suggestion here is that that corner is primed for redevelopment, having now been severed from the lease of the school building, but we'll see. And we have spoken with the school, and they are doing renovations to the school building, but they're just interior. There will be no change to the outside.
Is the school building now occupied? I mean, will it be occupied, assuming there's a normal school year?
No. They are renovating. They've taken possession now, just this last month. They will be renovating to the tune of $6 or $7 million over the next year to do various interior renovations just to spruce the building up. And then they will start with about 400 students in the fall of 2021, building to a K-8 with 923 students per their operating plan.
Do you know if they currently have it? The Amber Charter School currently has a site, I think,
in Kingsbridge and East Harlem. This will be this is their third elementary school, and it will act as the middle school for all 3 schools. And we'll be talking with the Traffic and Transportation Committee as well, because they have no traffic or transportation plans, and we're looking at a bit of a serious traffic situation. But as a use matter, it's the same use as before.
Right. Well, Wayne, I think I think this is an occasion for another letter. I think we should, even though they didn't respond to our letter a few years back, I think this, we should write them another letter and say, we now understand that the property has been sold, but you've retained control of the Hearst house.
Well,
And
it's
we
been
would,
leased, so.
we would appreciate knowing what your plans are for the Hearst house.
I see no reason why, I mean, that's a simple request for information, no reason why, you know, the district manager or the chair, you know, can't just write that letter and send it.
Yes,
We just need to have the proper contact.
yeah,
I would say the Youth and Education Committee
yes,
might be interested in having the Amber Charter School. And I think Faye might already be in touch with them because I reached out to Faye when I heard that, you know, the Hearst House is something related to the Hearst House was going to accommodate for charter school, but just to get a sense of what their plans are, the scope of innovations, and obviously the traffic issues.
I can forward to you my correspondence with Amber and with the Seventh-day Adventists, so you can see the contacts I've been dealing with.
That'll be great. That'll be great.
Thank you.
Dave, do you know whether Pat Courtney is aware of this?
Yes, Pat's aware.
Someone brought it to my attention, Steve.
Oh, okay, all right.
Anything else? Any additional new business? Hearing none, I will accept a motion to adjourn. It's 9:04.
Motion to adjourn.
Made by Vivian. Is there a second?
Second,
Jim Berlin, we are
thank you.
adjourned. Thank you all.
Bye.
Hey, thank you,
Thank you
everyone.
all.
And Ebenezer,
Bye.
Thank you,
before-
Thank
everyone.
you.
could you please
Thank you.
remember to send Chris
I'm sorry, when you're breaking up,
Ventura and
what you,
I, can you please remember to send Chris Ventura and I the attendance for this meeting?
yes, I will do.
Thank you. Take
Thank
care.
you. Thanks for having us.